Sir, can we start now?
Yeah.
So good evening, everyone, and very warm welcome to all of you to this oncology classroom evening session. This class on current controversies in radiation for lung cancer was actually scheduled a few days back, but because of some urgent reason, that class had to be postponed. And I must thank Dr. Tanvir Shahid sir for agreeing to reschedule this again and finding his time within this very busy schedule. As I understand today, there are a lot of parallel programs are going on across the country for different reasons. So we do not expect many participation today. So we are not waiting much. And I although don't need to introduce sir in this forum, he is so well known to all of us. Sir is senior consultant radiation oncologist at Indraprastha Apollo Hospital and perhaps one of the most well-known faces in radiation oncology community for his academic excellence. And he has been a wonderful teacher. We'll all love to listen from him. Thank you, sir, for being with us and accepting this invitation for another topic. Please take over the session and start your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dodul. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dodul, for such a kind introduction, which I start feeling that it's too much, for me to accept all those sweet words. But anyhow, thank you so much. And another big thank you, Dodul, for again, I keep on saying this, but I mean it, that the kind of effort which you are taking, it is something commendable. And it really requires a lot of hard work to continue these kind of activities. So really, I mean, a great thank you from all of us who are attending today. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. So I'll begin with current controversies in radiation for lung cancer. Yeah. So what I'm going to discuss today, basically, role of dose escalation, role of fractionation, 3D-CRT and IMRT in CA lung, which is superior, the role of PCI, the role of radiation in completely resected N2 disease, and how with the advent of immunotherapy and chemo, how we can sequence the radiation part specifically after the Pacific trial. So to begin with, why dose escalation? Very simple. We all know, and this is a very famous chart published by Martel in Red Journal in 1999. Very simple thing to understand over here. As we keep on increasing the dose, our survival improves. So in simple, by dose escalation, the survival is better. Now, this trial was published more than 3 decades ago, and I'm sure almost none of you would have even born by that time. And this was RTOG 7301. Basically, and this was none other than the first author was Carlos Perez himself. And what was seen in this particular trial in CA lung, that if you can give 40 gray of radiation in split or continuous, or 50 gray or 60 gray in a continuous format. So as we go on escalating the dose without any split, the response or the outcome is definitely better in the terms of survival. Then almost 1.5 decades back, this trial was published in 2005, and it was by the great man Bradley. We listen lot of works by him today, and Bradley happens to be from Washington University in USA. And along with Bradley, this particular trial was also done by Graham, the lady who gave the concept of V20. And in this particular trial, the dose escalation was not done on a general basis. It was basically the hypothesis of that was that if the tumor is small, and so in those patients, the V20 is definitely, it is less. So can we increase the dose according to the V20? And depending upon that, the groups were divided into group 1, 2, and 3. The group 1 was basically where the V20 was less. So in them, the dose escalation was much higher as compared to the group 2 and group 3. And what was seen that the radiation dose can safely be escalated if your V20 is less. That was very important. And if your V20, hello? Yeah, and if your V20 is less, definitely with the dose escalation also, your toxicity is very much acceptable. But what was again seen that the dose of 90 grade, this is something which was too toxic, practically it was not feasible. So this trial basically it gave the concept that dose escalation basing on V20. Again by the same author Bradley in 2010, this time it was again a dose escalation study. But what the difference was that along with the dose escalation of 74 gray in 37 fraction, this was basically a phase 1, phase 2 trial. Along with this, concurrent chemotherapy was also added. And what was seen that at the end of 1 year, if we see the overall survival and the progression-free survival was definitely, it was quite encouraging. Median survival at 12 and overall survival at 12 months was definitely, it was encouraging. And this was another important thing was that along with the dose escalation, weekly carboplatin and paclitaxel was given. And that led to this great trial, which everybody of us either know or we should know, that is RTOG 0617 trial. Now, this particular trial, I mean, every radiation oncologist, I'm sure, I mean, most of us know about it, and specifically my younger colleagues, they should know about this trial, that this is one of the trial which is in lung, it is truly a landmark trial, again by the same author, that is Bradley et al. And it was published for the first time in 2015. That was the first, and then 4 years later, the update was published. It was a phase 3 trial. Almost a 4 years of study, prospective study done, and 2 into 2 factorial design, 500 plus patients, and look at the number of institutions, almost 185 institutions took participations in this particular trial. All the 4 arms, since it was 2 into 2 factorial arm, all the 4 arms did receive radiation along with concurrent chemo. I'll come into the details in the subsequent slide. The end point was again very robust, that is overall survival, followed by progression-free survival, local failure, and distant metastasis. 4 arm, as I told, 2 into 2 factorial design, standard arm, that is 60 gray along with concurrent chemo, and another high dose arm, that is 74 gray along with concurrent chemo. Here lies the difference, because in this particular arm, that is 60 gray along with cetuximab, that is biological therapy, and along with concurrent chemo, and plus the 4th arm was high dose RT, that is 74 gray along with cetuximab plus the concurrent chemo. So concurrent chemo was given in all the arms. The standard 60 gray was compared with 74 gray, and another 2 arms had, apart from conventional chemo, they also included cetuximab. And another thing which is very interesting is that all these arms, after completion of the radiation, they also had to undergo a consolidation chemo. Now, what if you look at the median survival, standard dose radiation versus high dose radiation. Now, this is something which was absolutely, it was a kind of a shocker, because the high dose, it fared badly as compared to the standard dose. And even look at the cetuximab arm, it did not add any kind of a benefit if you add cetuximab versus no cetuximab. Interesting to note that first interim analysis was done in 2011, in which the high dose RT was removed subsequently. And in the third interim analysis, even the cetuximab was removed. Now, if you look at the result carefully, just look at the conventional arm, that is 60 gray with concurrent chemo, the median overall survival, the 5 years overall survival, and 5 years progression-free survival, it is better as compared to the high dose arm. And what was more heartening or disheartening, we can say, was that the local failure, the regional failure, and the distant failure, it was more in the 74 gray arm. Treatment related death was more in the high dose CTRT, and that was basically because of it was attributed to the hard dose, and also in the cetuximab arm. Even the esophagitis was more common in the high dose CTRT arm. So conclusion of this RTOG 0617, again very important, that standard dose of radiation along with the conventional concurrent chemotherapy remains to be the standard for stage 3 inoperable lung cancer, and high dose radiation is potentially harmful, and cetuximab did not add anything to the overall survival. The update was published 4 years later in 2019 in JCO with median follow-up of 5 years almost. And again, it was very interesting or disheartening to see that still the standard dose, it did better in the terms of overall survival and in the progression-free survival. And the conclusion remains the same, that standard dose with concurrent chemo remains to be the standard of care, and cetuximab doesn't has any kind of an effect. And indeed, the entire radiation oncology fraternity was waiting for this trial result, and it was really very surprising. Surprising for also one reason is that I'm sorry.
Sir,
Yeah.
any problem, sir?
No problem
Okay.
at all. I'm so sorry for that. Okay. So it was very interesting for this trial because the recurrence or the progression or the adverse outcome, what was not only because of the tumor regression or progression, but it was also because of the toxicity. That was something very interesting, and the authors, they gave the explanation that in the explanation was primarily that high dose arm, they did not do well because majority of, couple of the fewer patients could only complete the consolidation chemo in the high dose arm. That was one of the reasons what they gave. And also the another reason is that a typical the radiobiological principle, we all know that if we increase the overall treatment time, there is a tumor repopulation. That was another reason. And also the reason given by the authors was that because of the fear of toxicities, the radiation oncologists, they were pretty tight in the radiation portals. That was another thing. High dose RT was definitely associated with the higher hard doses, and higher hard doses was an independent negative predictor of survival, as and it had an adverse, or it had a detrimental outcome. So that was something very interesting. So the lessons learned from the RTOG 0617 was very aptly published in 2015 by a review article, the dose escalation in lung cancer. And the reasons were that a high rate of local recurrence, but another very important point more than local recurrence was that high mean hard dose and the lung doses. And there was an unreported treatment-related death, cardiac and pulmonary toxicity, and a very important radiobiological principle that the prolonged treatment time. Now, another very important, or you can say very interesting review article has been published again from the from US itself, where the dose intensification studies have been clubbed together for all the solid tumors, particularly for the head and neck, prostate, CNS, and also the lungs. And it is a kind of a systemic review, which is very interesting to read. I'll suggest my younger colleagues to have a look at it. And in this, they have tried to find out that the dose intensification, why it doesn't work, or whether it works in lungs or not. And what was interesting to see that all the trials where the chemotherapy was not included, and in them, if you give dose escalation, you have an advantage. But or the trials in which the chemotherapies are included, that is where concurrent chemotherapy is being given, there the advantage of dose escalation is being negated by the concurrent chemo. So in those patients where concurrent chemotherapy is given along with radiation, the dose escalation doesn't work. That is something very interesting. So the message was that the 74 gray is potentially harmful, and we know this by this time from a very important trial RTOG 0617. But still the dose remains to be controversial, and the reason is that toxicity, which is the prime reason for the concern for the detrimental outcome. So what can we do to reduce the toxicities? The solutions probably are adaptive RT is one, and apart from that, the altered fractionation, use of intensity modulated radiotherapy, and the particle beam therapy. Now, this article has been published just few weeks back in Lancet, and this is basically an adaptive radiotherapy, and that too based on the PET scan, that is a PET plan. And the Nestle is from Germany, and is primarily a randomized controlled trial of 170 odd patients with the conventional arm, and the other arm, which is the PET based radiation treatment planning. I'll not go into the details, but what was interesting in this study was that if you look at the locoregional progression, in the PET arm, it is much less as compared to the conventional arm. That is something very interesting. However, the toxicity is again something which was I was really not very convinced that why the toxicities was, again, it was similar in both arms. I was expecting, since the volume was less in the PET arm, the toxicity should have been less, but it was comparable. And the other thing was that even the overall survival and the progression-free survival was similar in both the groups. And the conclusions what the authors gave was that the FDG PET-based planning increases the locoregional control without increasing the toxicities that we do expect. And the volume reduction with PET-CT is feasible, and is not only feasible, the authors had really, that one word which really struck me was that they have claimed that it's potentially it should be considered as a standard of care. That is something very interesting. Another very interesting, again, another PET-based plan study for radiation was published a few years back in JAMA. And what really is very interesting in this particular trial was that in spite of just 42 patients were included, but they were from the poor performance status, and not only that, they were also having an oxygen dependence, and they had a poor lung functions. And the dose was escalated depending upon the response, and finally the PET based PTV, it went on to receive almost to the dose of 86 gray. That is very high. And just see the results. The median overall survival 25 months, the 2 years overall survivals 52%, and 5 years 30%, 82% local control. This is something really mind-boggling. So therefore something is there which we have to understand, and if you can really cater to the need, that if we can do the dose escalation only to in a tailored manner, and in the volume can be restricted, so might be that the results will be better. Another very important aspect, we radiation oncologists always have a fear that if I do an adaptive radiotherapy, what are the chances of failure? Or because of my adaptive, do I predispose the patient to have more failure? And this was answered by Larita trial published from Italian group again couple of years back. And they wanted to investigate the incidence of failure because of adaptive approach. And depending upon the response, they went on to do serial CT scans during the radiation, and depending upon the regression of the tumor, the replanning was done. You can see here at initiation how the dose distribution looks like, but gradually the dose was tailored depending upon the response. And what was most interesting, and it was very happy to see that the patterns of failure in field marginal and outfield. So in spite of my dose reduction, still my outfield failure was not that much, and majority of the failures, it happened in the infield, which again, it kind of motivates us that adaptive radiotherapy is possible in CL lung. Very important, RTOG 1106, which is undergoing, will have to wait for this trial, which might answer a lot about adaptive radiotherapy. Another RTOG 1308, which is again a proton-based dose escalated, which will have to wait for the result to come in subsequent years. So debate over radiation doses does continue. But one thing which I really wanted to highlight, specifically my all younger colleagues, that this paper was published by Minesh Mehta in Red Journal in 2001. And just understand the wisdom of this, because by this time, what we all know that dose escalation is not helping. In by and large, it is not helping. Minesh Mehta in 2001 itself in a Red Journal, he had a very nice review article, though it's kind of a difficult to understand, but if you read couple of times, you start getting a nag of it, in which it's a new approach to dose escalation in lung cancer. And what he has mentioned in the conclusion is that dose per fraction escalation approach in non-small cell lung cancer should yield superior outcomes. So it is not only the dose per fraction, but conventional dosing. He is meaning something beyond that, that dose per fraction. And if we increase the dose per fraction, and if we can decrease the overall treatment time, then tumor repopulation will not happen. So overall treatment is a very important player, and somehow whenever we are dose escalating, the overall treatment time is increasing, and because of that, we might be landing, we are landing into the detrimental outcome. So overall treatment time is something very important, which we have to keep it in mind. The next option is fractionation. Altered fractionation, we all know that what is the advantage of altered fractionation, and for specifically for the hyperfractionation, if you look, and particularly in the terms of CHART, that is accelerated repopulation can be prevented if we can do CHART. That's the most important point. And we all know that CHART was done particularly for two sites. One was for lung and another was for head and neck. I have summarized into one slide of the CHART. CHART was published for the lung cancer in Lancet in 1997 for the first time, and then in the Green Journal in 1999, 2 years later. It compared conventional radiotherapy, was compared with the CHART, and the number of patients were more in the CHART. The dosing was again standard for the conventional, but what was interesting over here in the CHART was at 1.5 gray, 3 times daily, 6 hours apart in 12 days to the total dose of 54 gray, and the dose was also planned in two volumes, phase 1 and phase 2, but total dose what was given was 54 gray. And the results were something very, very interesting. If you look at the 3 years overall survival compared to the conventional RT, the CHART did better, and 3 years local control, also the CHART did better. And another very important point is that squamous cell carcinoma did much better as compared to the other forms. And the conclusion, the CHART, it improved the median survival by almost 3.5 months. There was an overall survival benefit, though the toxicity, specifically the hermites, that is hermite sign, it was a transient, and in the due course of time it did recover. And the toxicity part, if you look, the dysphagia was more in the CHART, but radiation induced pneumonitis was most in the conventional RT arm. The other, I mean, the logistic reasons of CHART we all understand, because 3 times daily for 12 days continuous, I mean, it is something which is a lot of logistics has to be taken care of. So because of those logistics, the other trial, that is CHART-WELL, that is CHART just remains like that, but WELL means the weekend-less trial, and this was published in Green Journal in 2011. So it was just like CHART, but Saturdays and Sundays were omitted from radiation. It was again a phase 3 trial and almost 400 patients, and primary survival, primary endpoint was again very robust, that is overall survival. Conventional arm was 66 in 33 gray, and the CHART-WELL was basically 1.5 into 3 into 5 days a week, and total dose what was given was again 60 gray, and there was 2 volumes. One was the 1 and 2, and the 2 was basically the lesser volume, and total treatment what was taken as overall treatment time was 18 days. But again, the very important point was that if you look at the comparison of the overall survival 2, 3, and 5, it really, I mean, the CHART-WELL did not do better, whether it's overall survival, DFS, local regional control, or the metastasis-free survival. Again, CHART-WELL did not do better as compared to the conventional arm, and the conclusion was there was no significant difference observed in either DFS, local regional control, or distant METs. And most patients, they developed recurrence than distant metastasis. So chart did better, but not the chart well. And this, if you look at the comparison of the chart and the chart well, the outcomes definitely, it was the overall survival benefit was with the chart. But if you look at the chart well, that benefit is not there as what was expected. And the reasons, uh, it was really, it's difficult to point out that weekend less was a real culprit. I mean, it is difficult to say. And another study was ECOG 2597, which was basically closed early. And this trial, it did show a kind of an advantage of doing altered fractionation, but Chartwell did not do that. If you look at the meta-analysis of the hyperfractionation practiced in lung cancer, and this was published in JCO of almost 35 years studies and almost 12 trials included. And what was very important in this particular, that 2,000 patients included, and there was an absolute benefit of 3.8% at 3 years and 2.5% of overall survival benefit in 5 years. So the experimental RT, that is altered fraction, hyperfractionation arm, it did better as compared to the conventional RT, and that better was in the form of, there was a significant overall survival benefit. And however, we do expect that acute esophageal toxicity was more in the hyperfractionated arms. From hyperfractionation, let's move to hypofractionation. Hypofractionations, we know that UK is the place where hypofractionation still it is commonly practiced. And this SOCA study, another randomized phase 2 trial, which is comparing the sequential versus concurrent chemotherapy and hypofractionated radiotherapy. That is something very interesting, published in European Journal of Cancer. 130 patients, 2 arms, sequential versus concurrent CTRT. And what was very important is that hypofractionation along with concurrent chemo, that is something you really should dare to give that. And the conclusion is that hyperfractionated radiation with chemotherapy is feasible, as can be seen from the SOCA study. And it is reasonably safe for patients with stage 3 NSCLC. And the dose what was practiced, again, is interesting, 55 in 20. We also do give 55 in 20, but not without chemotherapy. It's without chemotherapy, and is particularly in the patients who are having a poor lung performance status, in which the medical oncologist cannot give chemotherapy. Only in those patients we do give. So where does hypofractionation radiotherapy stands in our practice? It is primarily, it is used for palliation, we all know. And what palliation? Again, it is a very standard palliation, that is chest pain, hemoptysis, and other things. So in our practice, either we give hypofractionation in a palliative setting, that's most common, or in the poor lung functions with a good performance status where chemotherapy cannot be given. Now, coming on to the technique, that which technique is better, whether it is 3D conformal or whether it is intensity modulated. And why we are thinking that, because ultimately, if you're thinking of lungs, you're thinking of pneumonitis, and plus apart from that, esophagitis, and we all know that the doses to the heart can be detrimental. So the reason for giving intensity modulated is that you can reduce the dose to all this OARs. That's the prime thing. And another very interesting analysis, it was basically a secondary analysis of RTOG 0617, the famous Bradley trial, in which the impact of IMRT was seen, and this was published in JCO, where IMRT versus 3D-CRT was being analyzed at in the form of 2 years overall survival, PFS, local failure, distant metastasis. Majority of the patients, that is almost 53 patients, 53% of the patients received 3D conformal as compared to the 47% patients intensity modulated. IMRT group had a larger planning treatment volumes, and it also had more stage 3B patients. And the results, if you see, the 2 years overall survival, PFS, local failure, and distant metastasis was similar between the IMRT versus 3D CRT. But what was most important was that IMRT had a lesser hard dose, that is important. And also the risk of pneumonitis, that is more than grade 3, was again, it was less. And the conclusion was that IMRT was associated with lower rate of severe pneumonitis as well as cardiac doses. That is very important. And IMRT routinely, it can be used for locally advanced NSCLC. So it does supports the routine use of IMRT. This was a phase 1 prospective dosimetric study published in Advances in Radiation Oncology, again couple of years back, and the result was something which we all know, no doubt about it, that if you see the IMRT was a 3D-CRT, the V20 dose is lesser in IMRT. Similarly, the V60 for esophagus is again, it is better in an IMRT, and heart, that is V5, it is better as compared to 3D-CRT in IMRT. So definitely your toxicities related to lungs, esophagus, and heart is lesser, and the lung V20 is definitely improved with IMRT. So the OAR doses, particularly with IMRT, becomes less. This is something we all have to be worried about, because we always keep on thinking about pneumonitis, and that because we as a radiation oncologists, when we evaluate the plan, we are more worried about total lung minus PTV, what is my V20, V10, V5 and mean lung dose, but heart dose is also an independent dosimetric predictor of overall survival, and that we have to keep it in mind. And this particular article, it did show that if your doses of heart mean from 10 grade, 10 to 20 and more than 20, so as the dose increases, that mean dose to the heart increases, your cardiac event probability also increases, and that can lead to a detrimental outcome in the terms of overall survival. So that we have to keep it in mind. Now, it's not that IMRT is again, it's a one-stop solution, though we know that V20 can be decreased in IMRT, but something which is V5, that V5 is a kind of a low dose bath. This again increases with IMRT, and that is because of, we all know that because of the increased number of beams which are being used in IMRT, and because of that the low dose, that is V5, it increases in IMRT, and this also can contribute to the lung toxicity. So that is again, it has to be kept in mind while using IMRT. IMRT also has some limitations, particularly related to the motion management, particularly two terminologies which we all have to remember. One is called as gradient effect and one is interplay effect. Gradient effect is nothing but it attributes to the movement of the tumor, because we know that lung, it moves during radiation. That is something we all know. Now, if you look at this black stars, I mean, this can correspond to the gradient effect. That might be that some part of the tumor during the tumor motion in the lung will not be treated because of the continuous mobility of that. So that can be called as a gradient effect, and it's also because of the rapid dose fall off because of IMRT. It can cause of that particular part of the lung might not get the desired dose. And interplay effect means the MLCs are moving, the tumor is moving, so now you have two a kind of a surrogate points, I mean, which is moving, that is tumor and the MLC. So in them, what can happen, that it can happen that because of these two movements, there can be discrepancies, and there can either be a hot spot or there can be a cold spot because of the inhomogeneity. So how to avoid the interplay effect? By increasing the number of arcs or decrease the dose rate. These are the two prime reasons, but again, this is something more of a physics principle rather than the real world principle, but still we have to keep it in mind, that one thing. So IMRT limitations, we have enough evidence that still 3D-CRT happens to be a more, I mean, it's by and large, radiation oncologists are more comfortable doing 3D-CRT, and we don't have any randomized data to compare IMRT to 3D-CRT. And it might be very difficult to get a randomized data because the number of patients which will be required will be quite high, and we might not be able to accrue so much of patients. So till then, we don't have any randomized phase 3 trials. And IMRT for lung cancers, the current status and future development. Now, if we looked at which are the patients, I mean, which are the patients where we can give IMRT. What I feel, the patients whom are eligible for IMRT is basically where the tumor volume is large and your doses to the OARs are not being met. So these are the ideal patients. And if you want to practice IMRT, you can pretty go ahead, no, nothing wrong in that. But again, you have to keep in mind about your motion management. That is something very important. And your CBCT matching and image based, you should have a robust IMRT QA program, and definitely the expertise because every institution has to ultimately come out with their own solutions and have their own data to really see that how is IMRT plan is being implemented in lung. And once you get a hangover of that, it's you can definitely go ahead. But definitely motion management is something which you have to keep it in mind. 3D CRT and IMRT, if you look at conclusion, 3D CRT is very simple, and the expertise, again, it is less expertise required. Limitations, we all know that doses to OAR can be high. Similarly, IMRT benefits, we know that OAR doses can be less, but also you have to keep it in mind the limitations of IMRT related to the motion management, your low dose rate regions, that is particularly V5, and sharp dose fall off can, again, it can lead to a dose inhomogeneity. So all those things has to be kept in mind. So before deciding the technique, one should consider the disease factors, the patient related factors, and of course the logistic factors. Coming on to the PCI and NSCLC, we know that CA lung, locally advanced CA lung, has the propensity of having a brain metastasis, and almost to the tune of 15 to 40%, which is quite high. So that was the reason that why it was being thought that if you can give PCI in small cell lung cancer, why not in non-small cell lung cancer? And the reason why PCI is being thought of, because can we reduce the morbidity associated with brain mets? Can we reduce the incidence? And can we increase the ultimately most important thing is that overall survival? But the role of PCI in non-small cell lung cancer is absolutely controversial, or we can say it is not being used. And this trial was published in JCO in that is RTOG 0214, almost a decade back. It was a phase 3 randomized control trial, PCI versus observation. And at the end of 1 year, something which is very good, and it's very happy to see that the brain metastasis incidence in the PCI arm was definitely less as compared to the observation arm. But what was something which was not sad to see was that the disease-free survival, it started separated at 3 months, but it was not significant, and there is no overall survival benefit as PCI versus observation arm. So only the advantage was there in the distant metastasis, that is the brain metastasis incidence was definitely less if you give PCI. The update of the RTOG 0214 was published last year in JAMA. And again, it was almost the similar what was published a decade back, that incidence of brain metastasis was definitely, it was less in the PCI arm as compared to the observation arm. But disease-free survival and overall survival, it really did not make much of a difference whether you give PCI or you observe. And the conclusion was that the PCI, it did reduce the incidence of brain metastasis, but it failed to prolong the overall survival. And so it was again being thought that, is there any subset of population where PCI can be given in stage 3 NSCLC? And this was basically an article or a meta-analysis published again this year. And really they did not find that there is any subset of patients where PCI can really help. So there is no improvement in overall survival in good performance status group. So the result from this meta-analysis was that there is no exactly, we cannot pinpoint any subset of patients where PCI can really be helpful. And the reasons why PCI in NSCLC did not improve the overall survival was that majority of the patients, despite having a better brain metastasis free, but still they failed extracranially. That is something very important to note. And even the patients who developed brain metastasis in the observation arm, they had a pretty good MRI surveillance. So if any METs did happen, it can be taken care by metastatic directed therapy. So that was again another very important point. So that's the reason that we could not get a statistical difference as far as overall survival benefit is concerned. Neurocognitive, wherever radiation is given in the brain, we always consider about the neurocognitive, and even in PCI and SCLC did have a neurocognitive impairment by giving radiation. And the strategies, again, you have to optimize the PCI dose. Hippocampal sparing, we all know, or you can use neuroprotective drugs like memantine. That was, again, this paper was published a couple of years back. And the guidelines, if you see, as far as the PCI in NSCLC is concerned, there is no role of prophylactic cranial radiation as far as locally advanced lung cancers are concerned. Coming on to the role of radiation in completely resected N2 disease, or what is the role of radiation in the post-op, we can say, and along with that in N2 disease also. So if you look at the post-op radiotherapy, the role of post-operative radiotherapy in non-small cell lung cancer, and this was the first, almost we can say the first Port meta-analysis published in 1998, almost more than 2 decades back. And if we see in this, the conclusion wise, the post-operative radiotherapy is detrimental to the patients in the early stage completely resected non-small cell lung cancer. And this we do expect that in early stage non-small cell lung cancer, where you have undergone a complete surgery, you should not give radiation, and we also do not give. And it should not be routinely used for such patients. We accept that. But the role of post-operative RT in N2 tumors is again not clear and needs further research. That was N2 where we really bother. The Port meta-analysis from 1998, 7 years later in 2005, they published their update, and update remains the same. The detrimental effect of post-operative radiotherapy on survival of stage 1 and stage 2. So you should not give. And we do accept that, but again, what was more interesting, I mean, or we can say what we are more interested at, what about the stage 3 N2 disease, should we give or not? And the conclusion was that we don't have any clear-cut evidence that whether post-operative RT is beneficial or detrimental in N2 disease. Port meta-analysis, another update was published in 2019, that is last year in Neoplasma Journal. And here is also the conclusion was that post-operative treatment for patients with stage 3 N2 non-small cell lung cancer. And here the issue, what was very important was that the post-operative radiotherapy is associated with improved overall survival and leads to a significantly increased disease-free survival. So with this meta-analysis, we do come to a conclusion that post-operative RT is better for N2 patients. But again, it is something which is not yet clear, because the trial which we were all eagerly waiting was Lung ART trial. And this is a phase 3 trial, and this was published recently, very recently in ESMO meeting. We have to still wait for the final paper to come. And this is a randomized controlled trial. Look at the number of patients, excellent, 500 patients. And endpoint was disease-free survival and overall survival. But this is something which was again, it was against our hope of Port meta-analysis published in Neoplasma last year, where it did say that post-operative radiotherapy was helpful. But in Lung ART trial, which is a properly conducted prospective control trial, in this, one thing is very good, that mediastinal relapse is definitely less with post-operative radiotherapy. But the overall survival, again, it is more in the post-operative radiotherapy. Overall survival, if you look at 3 years control arm versus the post-operative radiotherapy arm, it is comparable. So post-operative radiotherapy is really not helpful, and whereas it can also have a detrimental outcome, though we'll have to wait for the final paper to come. And the conclusion of the Lung ART trial, which is really, I mean, for the post-op patient, it's a very eagerly awaited trial. And it did show that post-operative radiotherapy was associated with a non-statistically increased disease-free survival, that is non-statistically. And conformal postoperative radiotherapy cannot be recommended. Postoperative therapy cannot be recommended as standard of care in completely resected stage 3A and 2 non-small cell lung cancer, and toxicities are more. That is something again. So clear cut, it should not be a standard of care as of now for a completely resected stage 3 diseases. So if you look at the ESMO recommendations of the postoperative radiotherapy, postoperative therapy in completely resected early stage, certainly not recommended. In R1 resection where positive resection margin or a chest wall involvement, postoperative therapy should be considered. Adjuvant chemotherapy should be considered in patient with R1 resections of stage 1B disease and a primary tumor of more than 4 centimeters. And if you want to plan for chemotherapy and radiation in post-operative setting, so the sequence as per the ESMO recommendation is that chemo should be given before radiation. I mean, this again something for me it is difficult to accept that if you look at the positive resection margin and chest wall involvement, why should I not give the radiation first before chemo? But again, it is a kind of whether you're looking at the local failure first or a distant metastasis first. It's because of the distant metastasis happens before the local regional recurrence, and that's the reason probably it is being said that you have to give chemotherapy before radiation. That is something. Now coming on to the last 2 slides, that how are we placed now with the advent of immunotherapy, particularly in the when we have a radiation and chemotherapy, and this trial is something which has really taken by storm, we can say, that is durvalumab after chemoradiotherapy in stage 3 NSCLC, and 700 patients. And after completion of chemotherapy, consolidation, that is durvalumab is given, along with the other arm is receiving only placebo. That is after concurrent chemoradiation, that's the placebo versus durvalumab. And this is something which is really, I mean, it's like it looks like a miracle that if you look at the progression-free survival at 12 months and 18 months in the durvalumab arm, just look at such a high percentage as far as the PFS is concerned as compared to the placebo. So median progression-free survival was 16.8 months with the durvalumab as compared to 5.6 months with placebo. The median time to death or distant metastasis was much longer with durvalumab as compared to placebo. And the grade 3 and grade 4 toxicities are absolutely comparable. So durvalumab is doing better in almost in every department, we can say. Progression-free survival was significantly longer with durvalumab than with placebo. And this progression-free survival, it is still, I mean, as the days are passing by, the value is going on improving. That is again very important. With this, I like to thank all of the people who have contributed in this with lot of inputs. And of course, last but not the least of this particular man, Dr. Dedul, for all his efforts. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dedul.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful class once again. And if you please allow me, there are already a few questions in the chat box.
Okay, and I'm happy I've completed before time.
you are always almost punctual.
No, thank you. I'll stop sharing something.
It's okay. I think, sir, then we can see each other if someone is willing to show their faces.
Okay. Okay. I'll stop sharing. Okay. Yeah, please.
So the first question from Dr. Bivai Parikh. PET plan had a lot of controversies in terms of randomization. Also, sample size was small and not powered well enough. The next one from Dr. Sachin Taneja. Please show the PET-based GTV, CTV, and PTV slide.
So Vibhay, I'll take Vibhay's first. You know, Vibhay is absolutely right. The numbers, I mean, even the trial which I showed, the German trial by Nestle, I mean, the numbers was quite less. And though he has said that potentially it could be a game changer, but still it is too early to say that it can be a game changer. It should become a standard of care. But what is important, what is very important in this is that we have to understand that why the PET-based plan became or it's gaining momentum, because ultimately we're thinking in the terms of reducing the volume. If you can reduce your volume, then might be that your toxicities can be less. But again, from the Nestlé's paper, the toxicity was again comparable. I mean, this is again, it is something which I expected that toxicity should have been less, but that was not the case. Sachin Taneja's paper, Sachin, I'll request you to go and read that GTV, CTV, PTV, because even, believe me, when I was incorporating it, it was a tough task to include. And that was the reason I'm very honest that I'm skipping that slide, because to understand that, because this paper, I got the hold of this paper in afternoon today. So I have just incorporated it. I really haven't read. It was confusing. And the other paper which I showed for the patients who are having a poor performance status, and they had gone till 86 gray, that was something mind-boggling, and that also was difficult because initially they had included the PTV volume, which was a pre-CT, and then gradually they went on tailoring their doses and reducing the volume, and dose escalation was done. So I'll request you to read that paper. Even I'll also read that. So offline, we can discuss. But I haven't read the paper completely, so I'll not be able to comment that. And Vibhas again question, how feasible would it be to follow the Larita trial-based adaptive radiation in high volume centers? Also comparing the contrast-based CBCT. Vibhas, again, Larita trial, I mean, I have read it, and I started feeling that we should start adaptive only as of now for the patients who are having a very large volume of poor performance status and with a poor lung functions. You should definitely not start doing with the patients who are having a good chance of cure. I mean, who are absolutely the standard patient. We should not, because we should get a hang of it. Still, I am not very comfortable because though there is a shrinkage of tumor, but still you are right. It's not only the high volume centers. If you discuss the signs, still reducing the dose, I'm afraid of. I'll not be very comfortable to do that. So irrespective of the high volume centers, I'll be very skeptical to start adaptive radiotherapy. But definitely to get a hang of it, I'll start doing it for the patient with a poor performance status, very large volume. On CBCT, if I see that the patient is really having a good response, so I'll start doing it. The technique in SOCAR was basically it was primarily, I think it was a 3D conformal. I think it was and it was a 55 in 20 gray. And why SOCAR was important was because it was along with 55 in 20, they had even given the concurrent chemotherapy, and that was something. But it was again compared with sequential chemotherapy. Ajit's question is that there has been hypo-RT study at AIIMS. I am aware about it, but sorry, I could not include it, that study. Even TMH is doing hypo-RT, but that was more in the palliative settings. I think Dudul might be aware of Srinivas Rathod was one of the, he's in Canada now. He has done a hypo-RT, but that was more for a palliative patients, and he had taken a 18 gray in 2 fractions weekly apart. So really not the classical hypo-RT, is more of a palliative RT. Again, Ajit is asking accelerated hypofraction radiotherapy with concomitant chemotherapy in locally advanced squamous cell carcinoma of lung, evaluation of response survival. I think he has quoted a study. I think I don't know, Ajit. Ajit wants to say that this is a study published. Okay, that's fine. Ajit's another question is that there was I think Ajit has really read the entire lung very well. Ajit and Vibhay, they have read the lungs very well. So Dudul, next time we put Ajit and Vibhay over here.
I'll put them together on a debate.
Yeah. So Ajit's another thing is that there is an improvement in ORR and OS as well, although a small phase.
Yeah, so it's basically it's regarding that AIIMS trial, which I believe was basically thesis of Somojit.
Okay.
And that study actually showed very good result that
Okay.
showed overall survival benefit as well.
Okay. Very good.
And there is one question sent to me personally from Abhishek Basu JR. So there are
Oh,
two Abhishek Basu.
yeah. I
Everyone
got.
should know in Kolkata. There are two
I
radiation
always.
oncologists, and their names are Abhishek
Yeah.
Basu.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he wanted to know what could be the possible reason for poor OS in port arm in lung art trial.
So as I told, the possible reason probably, like Abhishek has also asked over here also, that PCI
Yeah.
used in extensive stage. There are two reasons, one is that ultimately our endpoint should be overall survival, but the patients are not only failing cranially, but they're failing extracranially also. So even if you take care of the brain metastasis, the patient is developing a distant metastasis. That is one reason. The another reason that if you are not doing, if you're not giving PCI in NSCLC, but in the observations arm, somehow your surveillance is being done with MRI. So if you can get hold of any kind of METs, which can be oligo, it can be taken care by SRS. And for the related to the lung ART, again, which we all are eagerly waiting, we should wait for the final paper to answer that. But as of now, only one positive finding which came from lung ART, that mediastinal recurrence is less, but apart from that, nothing else. So again, it was a kind of I mean, something which was against what we were thinking, but it gives a robust evidence, 500 patients plus prospective design. So let's wait for the final paper to get all the answers to it. And yeah, so Abhishek has also continued the same question, that's fine.
Both Dr. Bibhay and Abhishek has a common question regarding your take on PCI or MR surveillance in extensive stage small cell lung cancer.
See, so again to Vibhay and Ajit, I'll say that since the guidelines doesn't recommend PCI in NSCLC as of now, so we'll go by it. Okay. And as far
extensive
as
stage for extensive stage small cell lung
oh,
cancer.
extensive small cell lung cancer, MRI. Yeah. So again, it is something which we'll have to think about it. I'll prefer for PCI in extensive stage lung cancer, but to quote the trials, I'm not remembering the trials. I think
So
if
last
if
week,
Mukti is there, I mean she can answer that question because she's read
last
a lot
week
about
we
that.
had a last week. In fact, we had a wonderful session on this PCI only, which was taken by Dr. Shikha Goel.
Yeah,
And
Shikha,
she had
yes.
actually explained everything. And what I remember from her lecture that yes, you can go ahead with MRI surveillance if you think that the patient is having a poor performance status, not able to tolerate the PCI, then that might be an option. But
Okay.
it's better to go ahead with PCI.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Carry on, Dr. Mukti, please.
Yeah, that Japanese trial actually basically on the MRI surveillance, and they have strong data as it is not showing any overall survival benefit if we are doing the MRI screening and not giving the PCI. Our scenario in Indian scenario, that MRI surveillance is a bit difficult that I feel. But as you were saying that Dr. Goel has already said that for the poor performance, those patients we can definitely take for the observation only, not for MRI surveillance, but for poor GC like the QUADS trial, we can give them the best supportive care. That is my take on.
So actually, Dr. Vibha, I think previously also he does mention that high volume centers, because last time also I remember he has mentioned something about high volume centers. So high volume centers, if you go by science, so definitely MRI surveillance is one of the option. But again, what Mukti is saying about the logistics part, I mean, definitely surveillance. I mean, that is another reason why MRI surveillance has always a problem, because how will the patient do the follow-up by doing MRI every 3 monthly and coming to the hospital and all those things. So Might be that PCI can become a more a cheaper option than that. But that science is one, logistics is one. So we should not try to relate them. But definitely it has the logics with science everywhere.
So the last question from Dr. Haridas: if limited media external nodes tend to benefit of port, I think it's already explained. Do all ipsilateral media external stations need to be covered, or only involved stations in post-op RT?
So the thing is that at post-op RT contouring is always, it's extremely challenging, you know. So you have to include the nodal stations which are involved. But moment you start doing an elective, be careful about the volumes. Though the total doses are less, but as of now, the involved station should be included.
Thank you so much, sir. And Dr. Ajit has again praised a lot about your class, as usual. Thank you, Dr. Ajit.
Thank you.
And we must congratulate Dr. Ajit as well. He has been doing wonderful in all academic fora, and he has gaining a lot of great achievements.
Thank you so much, and all the best to all these people.
Also, a lot of congratulations to all of the young radiation oncologists who left the radiation oncology branch for medical oncology.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, and thank you all these young brigades, you know, Vibhay, Ajay, Sachin, I mean, Haridas, I mean, who are doing extremely well, Abhishek Basu, Neelam, and so many else. I mean, we'll listen a lot from them, Dodul, I'm sure, in the coming years, you know.
True. I'm afraid how many of them will stick to radiation oncology.
No, at least I'm thinking Vibhay will be staying, I suppose. You know, he'll not run because he should have about to run by this time, you know.
So Vibhay have been given a great task by sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone, and good night.